Light and darkness, order and chaos. Someone asked me for the Faith version of the Night Wielder, and the Chaosbound is my answer. A Faith build that will run down anything in PVE in all your new game pluses. The theme behind bringing together light and darkness isn't just for show either. But first, we have to talk about what the Chaosbound is and isn't. Unlike the Night Wielder, the Chaosbound doesn't focus specifically on using one tool to plow through the vast majority of the game. This is because seals do not have combinations that allow you to bring out a single type of incantation, as well as staffs do, nor are their incantations as high on DPS as a Night Comet, while being as FP efficient and universally applicable. Instead, Faith excels at having more tools to answer a variety of situations, and that is exactly what we're going to do, while still retaining the theme of keeping combat itself simple yet powerful. First, let's talk about some incantations we're going to be running. For the weapon buffs, we're going with Order's Blade and Black Flame Blade. Now, I didn't pick these incantations just because of the theme. Order's Blade, despite requiring 13 intelligence, unlike Electrifying Armament, is indeed the better buff for our build, since we're going to be running the Tree Spear and the Black Knife. The Black Knife should be quite self-explanatory. It has a great weapon art that allows us to apply a 10% max HP reduction debuff and a DOT debuff. The max HP debuff is most useful when leading the fight with the Blade of Death. The DOT debuff makes this weapon art work really well for bosses, especially higher HP ones, as it burns damage according to their max HP. A solid ranged option that has infinite hyper armor while you're in the air. But our main weapon is the Tree Spear. Even though this has a secondary damage type, you can still buff the Tree Spear. If you haven't checked out my Great Spear video, you can check it out to see just why Tree Spear is a great Faith weapon, and how much AR you can be getting on it. The main thing here is the Tree Spear's secondary damage type is Holy Damage. If we apply Electrify Armaments to it, we will get 3 types of damage and suffer from split scaling thrice. Which is bad, as even though you will have high AR, you will not be doing as much damage. If you don't know about split scaling, you can check out my defense calculation video, also linked in the description down below. Unfortunately, many endgame bosses are strong against holy damage, which is where Black Flame Blade comes in, even though it does turn our Tree Spear tri-element. The main point of Black Flame Blade is the Black Flame debuff that deals max HP % damage. While the Black Flame debuff is great on bosses with high holy resistance, like Malekith or Elden Beast, it is still good on other bosses, as it also works great on targets with a high HP pool. As far as I know, no bosses are immune to Black Flame. A trick to using Black Flame Blade is to cast it while running, or after rolling, to get the faster cast animation, while also positioning yourself next to the boss in order to immediately attack them. Next is our array of buffs. Golden Vow is an aura buff that increases our damage and negation. Blessing of the Erdtree is a regeneration type buff that allows us to regenerate 12 HP per second for 90 seconds. Pre-buffing this allows us to not need to waste time on healing when we're only receiving minor injuries. If you find yourself taking damage quite often in overworld exploration, you can also consider adding Great Heal or Lord's Heal to your build, so you can take less HP flasks and focus on more FP flasks. I never found the need to, so I didn't include it. And finally, we have Lord's Divine Fortification, which is actually just a placeholder for any of the major damage reduction buffs. Use the right one for the right area or boss and you're golden. Having such a huge boost to negation makes fights easy mode. Next, for our offensive incantations. These are what we fall back on if we're fighting opponents you don't want to deal with in melee range, or extra tools when I do need some ranged option that isn't the Blade of Death. Let's start with the Discus of Light. After the 1.07 buff, this is super FP efficient, while doing enough damage for it to be usable. Just spamming Blade of Death at everything you see is not very FP efficient, and this spell is here for you to clean out some trash mobs at a range when you do require it. The only downside is, for some reason, you gain access to this much later than say something like Glintstone Pebble. Black Flame is a spell that can be charged, and applies the Black Flame debuff, just like Black Flame Blade. It's an okay ranged option, especially when you don't want to lose the Order's Blade buff on your Tree Spear, but the boss just happens to be out of range. Another point is, Black Flame deals fire damage, while Blade of Death deals holy damage, allowing you to deal with enemies with different resistances they're strong against. Since many endgame bosses have high holy resistance, Tree Spear doesn't work that well with them, so you'll need to fall back on using some Black Flame incantations. Scouring Black Flame is used for the same purpose, except it is an AoE, and also works well against larger enemies. Do keep in mind that this falls upward, so if you don't free aim it downwards, it can be hard to hit smaller targets on the ground, like rats, or targets further away. One good thing about this spell is, enemy AIs that tend to dodge your incantations will either not dodge this move or dodge the cast of the move but still get hit by the AoE if you have some distance. Okay, next we must talk a bit about the seal of your choice. Should you pick the Godslayer seal with a passive bonus, or the Erdtrees that has a higher incantation scaling at 80 Faith? Well, you can see here the Erdtree only has a slight bit of incantation scaling advantage for 70 Faith. I'm using 70 Faith because for a RL150 build I only have 70 Faith, but I will talk about this when you go even higher on your levels and want to maximize this build. At 80 Faith, even with the 1.1 times bonus, the Godslayer is only slightly better than the Erdtree for our two offensive spells. It is 2.5% stronger for Black Flame and Scouring Black Flame, but 6.8% weaker for the weapon buffs and Discus. At 80 Faith, I'd pick Erdtrees every time, but this isn't necessarily the case all the time, because at 99 Faith, the Godslayer catches back up with 6.4% stronger Black Flame attacks for only 3.3% weaker buffs. It depends on your playstyle, I would say, but I personally still prefer the Erdtrees as the final seal. As for why not Golden Order seal or the Dragon Communion seal, Faith buffs only scale with Faith-based scaling. Therefore, Erdtrees is the strongest seal when it comes to Order's Blade and Black Flame Blade. As I play the build quite melee-oriented, I prefer the Erdtrees over the Golden Order, even if the Golden Order has a higher total incantation scaling and a 10% bonus for Discus of Light. However, you gain access to the Godslayer seal much sooner than the Erdtree seal. You can get this before you even fight Godric, whereas the Erdtree is all the way at Volcano Manor. Again, both are viable depending on your choice. I personally prefer the Erdtrees when maxed out, but you get the Godslayers much earlier, so you might want to upgrade this first if you're doing a new playthrough. As for our stats, this is the distribution for RL150, and Vagabond is our optimized class choice. I will also give an example of how to scale this up to higher levels later, but let's talk about some important points. 28 Mine is more crucial than you think. This allows us to go through our entire rotation of buffs pre-battle, and immediately refill to full by drinking a flask or even resting at a grace. You can give yourself a big bonus by completely buffing up and resting at a grace to refill your FP without losing the buffs. And because we're running so many buffs, let me introduce one of our talismans first. The Old Lord's Talisman works with all the buffs I've listed above, extending the duration of our spells by 30%. It also helps extend our pathetically short duration on Black Flame Blade. And this also happens to be the order your incantations should be on your bar, as this is our buffing order, with the duration of the buff taken into account. Order's Blade is buffed before the Blessing of the Erdtree, because you're more likely to replace the Order's Blade buff with, say, a weapon swap or Black Flame Blade. As for Vigor and Endurance, they are just comfortable enough while supporting my fashion with Great Jars at RL150. You should definitely invest into more Endurance at higher levels, and give yourself an extra talisman slot by removing the Great Jars. Next, Tree Spear scales quite decently to Dexterity as well, and even some Strength. You can invest into these stats for further physical damage bonuses after having at least 80 Faith. This is the full build. The armor is just a fashion thing, and you can pick your own. It would be nice to have 51 or more poise for the first poise breakpoint in PVE, especially because this build wants some bulkiness to tank some hits. I chose to use the Godslayer here on screen because it weighs more than the Erdtree. I don't want you to be respecting your build and choosing Godslayer over the Erdtree, while not remembering there's extra endurance requirement and wasting a larval tier. Again, the seal is up to you. Let me introduce you to the other talismans. Dragon Crest Great Shield is super good for PvE at 20% physical negation. I've mentioned the Great Jars already. This is because I don't have enough stat points at 150, but it should definitely be replaced. Finally, the Pearl Drake Talisman is a generic elemental reduction talisman. If you know the specific area or boss you're fighting, you can replace them with the specific ones. Like if you're fighting Elden Beast, just use Halic Drake Talisman. Allow me to give a quick demonstration of how tanky you are. These are the stats while still using the Pearl Drake Talisman. However, if we know we're going to be fighting Elden Beast for example, we can optimize with Halic Drake Talisman and also have our full buffs and even physic up, which I like to use the Opaline Heart tier. This becomes your new holy negation. You might even say, holy cow. And it works for any of the elements. Here is the level 200 version with the Rigor to 60 and the Great Jars replaced by investing into more endurance. Some more mind because I have spare points. Faith is invested to 80 and Dexterity to 45 because the Tree Spear scales well to Dexterity and it also increases our cast speed. I replaced the Great Jars with Crimson Sea Talisman, but feel free to fill this with anything. You're already super tanky, so if you prefer a more incantation playstyle, feel free to use the Phlox Canvas or even either of the Scorpion Charms. Although personally, I'm not a fan of either of these because we use both fire and holy damage. Furthermore, they also have the physical negation deficit on a build that wants to be tanky. One more thing is, at even higher levels, you might want to get a physical infused lance for areas and bosses with high holy resistance, while also gaining access to another Azure form. My preferred playstyle is to just buff up and poke down everything. If I find myself going very aggressive, I will even two-hand the Tree Spear for more poise damage. However, if I find myself needing Black Flame Blade for the fight, I will tend to one-hand the Tree Spear to be able to cast Black Flame Blade quickly. Again, the ranged options are also available to support you when you need to play more defensively. Like and subscribe, and if you want a customized build video just like this, you can buy my book to support the channel. It will allow you to request or expedite any topic. Right, signing out.